The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung. You want others to treat you with respect, but do you respect yourself first? You demand fairness, yet how often do you betray your own needs in silence? You crave loyalty, but how often do you abandon your own word? You long for dignity, but how often do you collapse into apology when you have done only to call it patience? How many times have you let exhaustion hollow you while still presenting the mask of strength? And when you look closely, isn't the disrespect you receive from others often a mirror of the disrespect you first showed yourself? Jung's warning cuts deep. You cannot demand from the world what you refuse to embody within. If you deny your worth, if you erode your boundaries, others will walk where you refuse to stand guard. Respect begins not with persuasion, not with protest, but with presence. When you hold your own dignity without apology, you train others to do the same. When you cease to betray yourself, the world. So the question presses, will you keep begging for respect while secretly despising yourself? Or will you finally risk the harder path, the terrifying but liberating act of honoring yourself completely? Only then can others follow. You live in a world that tells you to earn respect through achievement, appearance, or approval. You are taught, but has that ever worked? Or have you noticed that the more you strive for external validation, the less authority you hold over your own life? Ask yourself, how many times have you kept quiet just to avoid displeasing someone, only to feel while quietly neglecting your own needs? How much of your energy has been wasted trying to convince people who only mirror the disregard you already practice toward yourself? Jung's insight is merciless, but freeing. The outer world reflects the inner one. If you despise yourself, the world will echo that disdain. If you tolerate your own compromises, others will exploit them. If you live with self-respect is not a gift to be begged for. It is a boundary you enforce by how you live. Look honestly at your patterns. Do you equate kindness with self-erasure? Do you confuse humility with silence? Do you call endurance a virtue when it is really surrender to disrespect? These habits do not preserve peace, they corrode it. The truth is simple. Once you begin, you discover that respect is not granted by others first. It is mirrored back because you finally hold it within yourself. So the pressing question remains. Will you keep waiting for dignity to arrive from the outside, or will you dare to embody it from within? Respect for Jung is not a social strategy. It is a psychological necessity. The path toward respect is not about manipulation, but individuation, the process of becoming whole. Each of Jung's central structures sheds light on why you keep tolerating disrespect and how you might finally stand firm in yourself. The persona, the mask of respectability. You wear a mask every day, polite, competent, agreeable. So you polish the mask instead of cultivating the person beneath it. But what happens when you over-identify with the persona? You begin to believe that your worth is only as strong as your performance, your charm, your approval ratings. You teach others to respect the mask, not you. And when cracks appear, ask, are people respecting your true self or just the costume you maintain? And when you hide behind it, how can anyone learn to respect the person you refuse to reveal? The shadow, disowned, worth returning as disrespect. Everything you refuse to acknowledge in yourself, the anger, the pride, the need for dignity, falls into the shadow. You tell yourself every time you endure dismissal, isn't it echoing your own hidden belief that you deserve no better? Every insult tolerated is the shadow speaking through another's mouth. The tragedy is that until you face your shadow, others will keep carrying it for you by mirroring your self-neglect. Ask, do you tolerate disrespect from others because you secretly agree with it inside yourself? Complexes, childhood experiences, being dismissed, shamed, or ignored plant complexes that script your adult relationships. When you were told, "Don't be difficult," you learned to silence yourself. When you were mocked for asserting needs, Now, as an adult, these complexes are triggered unconsciously. You let the colleague interrupt you, excuse the partner's neglect, you allow the friend's disregard, because somewhere inside, the child still fears punishment for standing tall. Ask, how often are you really arguing with the present, and how often are you projection? Respect handed away often. Often you admire in others the very dignity you deny in yourself. You call them strong, confident, admirable, while quietly believing you could never embody the same. This is projection. You hand away your authority, then wonder why others do not respect you. But isn't it your own disowned strength? Until you retrieve it, you will keep feeding their authority while starving your own. Ask, who do you admire for boundaries you refuse to set yourself? And why keep giving away what could belong to you? The self, wholeness, that commands respect. For Jung, individuation is the integration of these fragments, persona, shadow, From the self, you do not beg for respect, nor do you perform for it. You carry it. You embody it. Others may still resist or oppose you, but they cannot ignore you, because you no longer ask, what would it mean to live as though your dignity was non-negotiable? Could you imagine a life where respect was not begged for, but radiated naturally from your wholeness? The foundation is this. Until you integrate these structures, you will keep collapsing into roles, shadows, and the moment you begin reclaiming the fragments, by facing your shadow, revisiting your complexes, withdrawing your projections, you discover that. So the question is, sharp, will you continue to demand from others what you refuse to embody within? Or will you do the harder work, facing your fragments, claiming your worth, and standing whole so that others have no choice but to mirror the respect you finally give yourself? When you look closely, you will see that the places where others dismiss you often mirror the very places where you dismissed yourself first. These examples are ordinary, but they are merciless in what they reveal. Workplace. The silence that trains disregard. You stay late without. You tell yourself you are being a team player, but isn't it really fear of appearing difficult? You think patience will win respect, but doesn't it only teach others that your boundaries can be ignored? Each time you stay silent, each time you ask, how many promotions have you lost? Not from incompetence, but from your own quiet erasure. How often have you watched others rewarded for authority you refuse to claim? Relationships. Love confused with tolerance. In romance or friendship, you say you are forgiving, but isn't it often fear of abandonment disguised as virtue? You hope that giving more will earn you respect, but doesn't it usually invite only further disregard? Ask, when was the last time you demanded reciprocity instead of carrying the whole weight yourself? How many times have you mistaken You keep peace by swallowing your needs, by playing the role you were assigned decades ago. You act small to avoid conflict, believing this is respect. But isn't it really surrender? Ask, do you confuse family loyalty with self-erasure? And if you never assert your adulthood, how can your family treat you as anything other than the child they once commanded? Friendships. Half presence, half resentment. You agree to favors you cannot afford, lend time you do not have. Yet doesn't this create the very resentment that eventually poisons the bond? Friends respect your word only when you do. Ask, how often do you call exploitation friendship just because you are afraid to disappoint? The self, the root of all external mirrors. Every pattern circles back to one fact. People follow the script you hand them. When you betray yourself, you invite others to. When you live as if your boundaries are negotiable, others will test them until they collapse. The external world does not invent disrespect. It reflects the permissions you silently give. Ask, are the wounds you carry truly inflicted by others, or are they the natural consequence of your own self-betrayal? These examples may sting because they are familiar, but the truth is sharper. Much of the disrespect you suffer is rehearsed daily through your own habits of silence, overgiving, and collapse. You are not responsible for the cruelty of others, so ask yourself with full honesty, in which part of your life do you tolerate what you would never advise another to endure? Who mirrors back to you the very contempt you secretly carry for yourself? And most importantly, what would happen if just once you chose to honor? And every typical example of disregard is not only a wound, but also a map pointing you back to the one place respect must begin within. Disrespect does not arrive suddenly. It seeps in through repeated, predictable mechanisms. Each one erodes your self-respect until others no longer feel compelled to respect you either. If you trace the path, physiological. The body betrayed. First, your body knows before your mind admits it. Fatigue signals the need for rest, but you override it with more work. Hunger asks for nourishment, but you silence it to maintain appearances. Anxiety screams that a boundary has been crossed, but you bury it to keep peace. Each time you ignore the body, you teach yourself. Ask, how many times have you collapsed into illness or burnout because you refused to heed the body's warnings? How often have you called weakness what was actually your body's desperate attempt to defend your dignity? Cognitive, the inner voice that corrodes worth. Your thoughts become the script. When you tell yourself, I don't deserve better, you accept neglect and others deliver it. The cognitive mechanism is ruthless. Your self-talk becomes the permission slip for others' behavior. Ask, whose voice do you still carry when you doubt your worth? And why do you keep treating those words as law when they were only wounds disguised as truth? Emotional. When you suppress sadness, it hardens into numbness. When you swallow fear, it disguises itself as compliance. These emotions leak out in sighs, passive aggression, distance, teaching others that your feelings do not need to be taken seriously. Respect requires emotional clarity. Ask how many of your relationships run on unspoken resentment instead of honest exchange. How often do you sabotage connection by refusing to name what you truly feel? Behavioral, the collapse of boundaries. Every yes you give when you mean no chips away at your authority. Every apology for things that were never wrong teaches others you are willing to carry their burdens. Behavior shapes reputation. When you live as if your word has no weight, others treat it accordingly. Ask, do you act as though your boundaries are sacred or as though they are favors others can bargain away? And when you finally break down from exhaustion, do you blame them or the silence that trained them? Relational, teaching others through your example. Respect is contagious, but so is disregard. Partners, children, friends, all unconsciously absorb the model you live. If you treat yourself as disposable, they will too. Ask, what lesson about worth are you teaching those who watch you most closely? And if your child lived exactly as you do, would you call it dignity or despair? Ethical, the final collapse of integrity. When you abandon your own dignity, you compel others to navigate the chaos you refuse to order within. You force them to guess your limits, absorb your resentment, carry the weight of your silence. Jung would say, the shadow of disowned worth. Ask, how many times have you blamed others for crossing lines you never drew? And how long will you confuse their injustice with your own refusal to stand as guardian of your integrity? These mechanisms, body ignored, mind corroded, emotions suppressed, behavior collapsed, relationships distorted, integrity eroded, form a single cycle. So pause and face the sharp truth. Is the disrespect you suffer truly theirs, or is it the echo of your own self-abandonment? How many of your wounds are not random injuries, but the predictable result of refusing to honor your own worth? And if you reversed even one of these mechanisms, listen to the body, and the moment you begin, even in the smallest act, the cycle breaks. Respect does not begin with others. It begins with the courage to treat yourself as if your dignity is non-negotiable. Respect is not granted by wish or demand. It is practiced daily in the smallest of choices. If you want others to treat you with dignity, you must first model it in the way you treat yourself. This is not vanity. It is discipline. It is the work of reclaiming observation, naming the acts of betrayal. Begin by seeing what you have long ignored. Notice when you say yes, though you mean no. Watch how you apologize for existing, how you downplay your achievements, how you silence your fatigue. Each act teaches the world that you are negotiable. Ask yourself, how many times today did I give away authority over my own life? How many wounds came? Boundaries. Practicing the discipline of no, respect begins where your tolerance ends. You must draw lines not to exclude, but to protect what is sacred. Start small. Decline one request that would exhaust you. Withdraw from one conversation that disrespects you. End one obligation you keep. Ask what costs more, another yes that empties me, or the courage to say no and remain whole. Shadow work, facing the fear of worth. Why do you tolerate disrespect? Beneath it lies shame, the belief that your needs are excessive, your presence a burden, your worth conditional. Jung reminds you, then ask, whose voice is this? Is it truly yours, or an echo from childhood when standing tall was punished? Until you face this shadow, every boundary will feel like betrayal. Reframe, redefining respect as proportion. Self-respect is not arrogance, it is proportion. It is neither inflation nor collapse, but balance. Speak your strength plainly without embellishment or dismissal. When fatigue arrives, rest not as weakness, but as training. Ask, what if respecting myself is not pride, but honesty? What if the truest humility is to stand in proportion, neither inflated nor erased? Practice rituals of daily dignity. Respect must become a rhythm. Create daily practices that train your nervous system to express one truth instead of swallowing it. Choose one act of nourishment over one act of depletion. Small rituals accumulate into a posture of dignity. Ask, if I lived each day with one act of respect for myself, how quickly would others begin to treat me differently? Repair, restoring integrity in relationships. Self-betrayal does not stay. Admit where your silence has hurt others, where your resentment has corroded love, where your absence has starved trust. Apologize not for your needs, but for concealing them. Rebuild by offering your presence with clarity. Ask what would shift in my relationships if I showed up whole instead of half erased. What healing might begin if I stopped demanding respect without embodying it myself. Reorientation, from seeking to embodying. The deepest application is this: stop begging for respect and begin embodying it. You will lose some people, those who thrived on yourself. You live from the self, not the persona, from dignity, not desperation. Ask yourself, am I willing to risk rejection in order to end the cycle of self-abandonment? Am I ready to stop teaching the world my disposability and start teaching it my worth? Practical application is not theory, it is training in presence, boundaries, shadow proportion, ritual repair, and reorientation. Each act builds a new reality where you are no longer disposable but whole. So ask yourself with full honesty, will you continue to plead for respect while secretly betraying yourself? Or will you begin today with one act of dignity that cannot be negotiated? Because until you respect yourself, nobody else will. And once you do, the world adjusts, not because it has changed, but because you finally have. Jung's warning is clear. What you refuse to honor within becomes your shadow, and the world will reflect it back without mercy. If you live as though your word carries no weight, others will dismiss it. If you betray your limits, others will exploit them. If you despise yourself in secret, others will echo that contempt in public. You cannot beg your way into. Ask yourself how much of the disrespect you suffer is truly malice, and how much is the predictable consequence of your own silence. How many times have you mistaken endurance for virtue when it was really surrender? How often have you blamed others for crossing when the truth is that you have been training the world to see you as disposable? The shift begins the moment you choose self-respect, not as mood but as discipline. One clear boundary, one kept promise, one act of rest without apology. Each step teaches others the lesson you finally learned yourself. Your dignity is not up for negotiation. Some will resist, some will leave, but what remains will be stronger. So the choice confronts you now. Will you keep waiting for respect to arrive from the outside, or will you dare to claim it from within? Will you continue punishing yourself for being ignored, or will you begin honoring yourself so deeply that others cannot ignore you? Take one act today, and once you do, you no longer need to demand respect others give it